The Top Floor Please podcast, where women in leadership rise together. I'm your host, Melissa McCormick, executive coach and founder of the Grace and Salt Leadership Academy. This is your space to find clarity, grow in confidence, and lead with bold authenticity. Whether you're navigating the boardroom, building your team, or stepping into new territory, you're not alone. Let's talk real challenges, real growth, and real leadership because the top floor isn't just a place, it's a mindset. Alrighty then, let's get started.
Today's topic is a little bit uncomfortable. In fact, I've changed my outfit 3 times because I'm not exactly sure what I should be wearing. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but I batch my podcasts. And so every time I'm recording, even though I record 3 or 4 at a sitting, I always change my clothes for each one. And I didn't know what to wear for this one. So I am wearing this beautiful blouse that I love that is going to make me feel comfortable with an uncomfortable situation, or just not really a situation, but uncomfortable topic. Okay. So I'm just going to dig in here and ask you a question. Have you ever laughed at a comment that made you uncomfortable? Maybe you smiled. Maybe you changed the subject. Maybe you pretended that it really didn't bother you. But then later you're driving home or you're thinking about it. You're like, that didn't make any, what did they mean by that? Right? What did they mean by that? That felt uncomfortable and awkward. And I'm not sure how to take that. And it could be maybe somebody commented on your appearance instead of your presentation. Maybe somebody called you sweetheart in a meeting. I used to have this guy, sales guy that worked for a freight forwarder, and he would call me Toots. I was in my 20s. You don't call me Toots in my 20s. You don't call me Toots in my 60s. Right? So maybe someone called you sweetheart, a little bit derogatory, right? Maybe somebody stood just a little too close, or they made a joke that everyone else laughed at, and you might have giggled or just smirked a little bit, but it really wasn't funny, and you didn't really know what else to do. So for many of us, in fact, most women, right, those moments, they weren't isolating. They were kind of isolating, but they were also part of the culture. Somewhere along the way, we learned a lesson that we should never have had to learn. And that was ignore it. Don't make it awkward. Don't be too sensitive about it. And don't jeopardize your career. So today, I want to talk about the comments we were told to ignore. Welcome to the Top Floor Please podcast. This is the podcast for high-performing women who are ready to stop staying stuck and become the obvious choice for the next level. I'm Melissa McCormick. I am your host. And for years, I was the go-to doer, right? I'm that woman who everyone depended on to solve problems, get things done. What I didn't realize was that doing more wasn't preparing me for the next level. It was keeping me from it. Now, my breakthrough came when I stopped trying to do everything myself and I started leading through others. Right? Instead of being the go-to doer, I became the go-to leader. So if you've ever felt stuck, if you've been doing all the things, but you're still not getting to the next level, or you found yourself wondering, what do I need to do differently? I've been doing the same thing for 10 years. What do I need to do differently to go to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Because that's exactly where we're here, why we're here. We're going to figure this out together. Make something super duper clear. This episode is not about pointing fingers. It is not about revisiting every uncomfortable interaction that we or I have ever had. And it certainly isn't about saying every awkward comment is harassment, right? This episode is about leadership, and it's about culture. It's about the moments that shape how people experience work, and ultimately how they lead. But let me just say this one thing. You might want to write this down. Culture isn't built by mission statements, right? You probably know that, right? You've got your mission statement, it's up on the wall. Everybody has to have it on their computer, laptop, whatever, and we have to memorize it. That's not culture. Culture is built in conversations. It's built in what gets celebrated. It's built in what gets corrected. And more importantly, it's built in what gets ignored. I really struggled with even recording this. But this topic has been coming up again and again in my world over the last 6 months. So I think it's time. I think God is saying, Melissa, you need to use your voice and you need to use your platform and you need to start the conversation. So we're going to talk about it. For many of us, myself included, these comments, we learned to dismiss them. Whether it was comments about my appearance or your appearance or comments that minimized our expertise. Maybe it was a comment that crossed the line, but not enough of one that we felt comfortable saying something. We're just going to put it to the side. Sometimes it was one person. Sometimes it was different people. And sometimes, honestly, I really believe this. It wasn't even intentional. But over time, something happened and those moments started changing our behavior. Maybe we spoke up a little less. Maybe we second guessed ourselves a little more. Maybe we rehearsed our words before meetings. We wondered if we were overreacting, right? Maybe you're just being a little too sensitive. We became experts at reading the room before we spoke. And it wasn't because we lacked confidence. It was because our experience has taught us to be careful. And here's what I want every leader listening to understand. Those experiences don't stay in someone's 20s. They follow them into director roles. They follow them into vice president roles. They follow them into executive leadership. And that's why this conversation matters. So there was a time in my career when something kind of unexpected happened, right? There were comments that were getting too frequent and honestly too close to home. So I started writing things down. Now, I was doing that for a main reason, right? Not because I was building a case against anyone and not because I planned legal action or anything like that. I started to write it down because I didn't know if I was imagining it. And I really thought that if I mentioned it to somebody else, they would go, Melissa, you're being too sensitive. But was I? So I started writing it down. And maybe you've questioned yourself like that too. Maybe I'm just being a little too sensitive. He didn't mean it that way. Maybe I should just kind of let it go. So I wrote those comments down. I wrote the dates. I wrote the conversations. I wrote the things that didn't quite sit right with me, just enough to remember, not the whole thing. But as the pages filled up, I realized that it wasn't one comment, it was a pattern. And that's what changed everything for me, right? It wasn't because I suddenly became angry. It was because I finally stopped questioning whether what I was experiencing was real or not. And so I'm sharing this story with you, not to relive it, not to embarrass anyone, but because I know I'm not the only woman who's ever wondered, am I overreacting? In fact, with my client business today, which this does infuriate me, that today I'm still having this conversation, right? My mom went through this. Boy, listen to the podcast interview with my mother and some of the challenging situations she went through. I've gone through it. My daughter is now going to have to go through it. My granddaughter, that's ridiculous. So this is all about making sure that Valerie, my granddaughter, doesn't have to go through this. Right? Yeah, that's what this is all about. And so if you've ever asked yourself that question, you are not alone. I've just had a couple weeks ago a conversation with a client who was thinking the same thing. Like, maybe I'm just being too sensitive, but this is what's happening. What do you think? But maybe, like, just maybe this wasn't her sensitivity or your sensitivity. Maybe that issue is that we've normalized these things that should never have been normal. Right? We've normalized it. Like, oh, he's just an older guy. No. Here's what I've come to believe, that the most damaging part of many of these moments was not the comment itself. It was the silence afterwards. Because silence teaches. When no one says anything, the person making the comment assumes, well, it must be acceptable. And the woman hearing it assumes she's on her own, because everyone else in the room learns that this is simply how things work here. Culture is being taught, whether we realize it or not, every single day. And I just want to pause for a second here. By the way, I'm talking specifically to the workplace, but this is not just happening in the workplace. This is where we volunteer as well. So I know that there are men listening to this episode. And so first, I just want to say thank you so much. I really genuinely mean that, because this is a conversation. It's not meant to make you defensive, right? It's an invitation to lead. Changing workplace culture or volunteer culture isn't the responsibility of women alone. It's the responsibility of leaders. And leadership belongs to all of us. In fact, we women cannot change it without you men. So I just want to speak directly to you for a moment. And I want to thank you for staying with me on this very uncomfortable topic. And you might be thinking, I've never said anything like that before, or I would never intentionally make someone uncomfortable. And you're right. I believe you. Absolutely. But it isn't about assuming bad intent. It's about recognizing that leadership isn't measured only by what you do. It's also measured by what you're willing to address. One of the greatest leadership lessons that I've learned is this, and that is that culture isn't defined by the worst behavior in the room. It's defined by what the best leader is willing to tolerate. Just think about that for a moment, right? If someone makes an inappropriate comment in a meeting, if someone consistently comments on a woman's appearance instead of her ideas, if someone tells a joke that clearly lands wrong, the question isn't, did I say it? The leadership question is, what am I going to do about it? Because sometimes leadership looks like pulling someone aside after the meeting. Hey, I know you probably didn't mean anything by it, but here's how that came across. Or in the moment, you're saying, hey, let's keep it professional, or let's get back to our discussion. It doesn't have to be a confrontation, right? It just needs to be courageous. Then the woman feels seen too, right? Every time a respected leader says something, that culture changes. Every time a respected leader says nothing, that culture changes. I'll just give you an example. Years and years ago, I was sitting in a conference room. There was probably 30 people in there. And we're going through the agenda. We're having conversations. Somebody is presenting, and somebody makes a very derogatory comment. And they thought that it was, they thought they had whispered. Okay. It was a he. He thought he had whispered, and he didn't. And so everybody heard it. And everybody, I was the senior person in the room. Everybody's looking to me like, oh my gosh, what is she going to do? What is she going to say? And I, in like nanoseconds, is evaluating the room and also thinking myself, how am I going to address this? I have to say something, right? So I did. I said something super quick just to stop it and nip it. So he knew the entire room heard it, and also so that everybody, because probably half of the people in there were relatively new employees. And so it also, I knew that if I didn't say something in the moment, like if I just pulled him aside afterwards, that I missed an opportunity, and then everybody in that room would think it's okay. The way he behaves is okay. And it absolutely was not. So I stopped at that moment. We continued on. I then pulled him aside afterwards and said, look, that was inappropriate. He claimed I didn't mean anything by it. Whatever. I get it, but it was very offensive to me. And if it was offensive to me, it was offensive to most of the people in the room. So you need to apologize to the folks that were there, because this is totally unacceptable. Right? Yeah. I'm guessing that you've experienced something like that. So I want to speak to the women right now. And if this episode is bringing back memories, I get it. I get it more than you know. And here's what I hope you hear today. This isn't about carrying guilt because you didn't say something years ago. Many of us were navigating the workplaces where speaking up came with consequences. We worried about being labeled, right? We were worried about being too labeled, being too emotional, too sensitive. Oh, we weren't a team player. Or, oh, get this one, she can't take a joke, right? Or she's difficult. Those labels carried real career consequences and implications. So many women did what they had to do to survive, right? They just survived. And so we've kind of put it to the past. Just a sidebar here as I'm thinking about it. If you haven't seen the movie 9 to 5 with Dolly Parton, excuse me, with Dolly Parton, it's all about this workplace kind of sexual harassment stuff. And it does go over the top, and it's funny and crazy all at the same time. Like some of the things happen in the workplace, but their response to it is not something that any woman is going to do. So it's kind of funny, but it brings the point up. I think the movie's from back in the 80s, which is disgusting for me that we're still talking about this when the 80s is so long ago. And so my goal and my hope for that next generation of leaders, I would love it to change for my daughter's generation, but more so for my granddaughters. We need to become the people that we needed back then, right? That executive who noticed, that vice president who checks in afterwards, that manager who says, I saw what happened. Those 4 words, I saw what happened, that can change someone's entire experience. Why? Because suddenly they're not wondering, was that just me? Right? Is that just me? And they're reminded that you're not alone. And sometimes that's that beginning of courage. So one of the things that I coach leaders on all the time is this: everything communicates. The meetings we lead, the questions we ask, who gets interrupted, who gets credit, who gets invited, who gets overlooked, right? Who feels enough to disagree. Those things all communicate culture. So long before your value statement ever does, leaders consistently protect dignity. When leaders consistently protect dignity, people notice. When leaders consistently ignore disrespect, people notice that too. This episode isn't asking for perfection. None of us gets this right every time. I've missed moments, absolutely. You've probably missed moments too, of course. What matters is what we choose to do next. Culture isn't built on one dramatic moment. It's built on hundreds of ordinary moments, one conversation at a time. So I want you to think about these 3 things. These are my 3 key takeaways. I really want you to write them down. The first one is small comments can have lasting effects, not because of the words themselves, but because of the silence that follows. Leadership requires paying attention to both. I need you to notice, right? And this is going to be hard for the guys. The guys that I'm talking to, this may be difficult because you don't see it. You're not sensitive to it the way women are. So I need you to be intentional and to notice. Number 2 is I want you to create a respectful workplace that isn't the responsibility of the person who was offended. It's the responsibility of every single person who noticed it. think of my experience that I talked about in the boardroom. If I wouldn't have said something, right? It's the responsibility of everybody who witnessed it. Now, if I wasn't there, I certainly hope, if it were a group of peers, I certainly hope that there was a leader in that room that would have said something, that would have said, excuse me, that was extremely inappropriate. We don't talk like that here. And number 3, the kind of executive leader people remember isn't simply the smartest person in the room. It's the person who made everyone feel respected enough to contribute their best work. That's the kind of culture people never forget. So before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this one question. When someone around you experiences a moment that doesn't feel right, what kind of leader will you choose to be? Will you assume someone else is going to handle it? Will you convince yourself that it really wasn't that big of a deal? Or will you become the leader who quietly changes the culture one conversation at a time? You know, so many years ago, I started writing things down, not because I wanted evidence, but because I wanted to know whether I was imagining it, whether maybe I really was too sensitive. And looking back through those pages, I realized something. It wasn't one comment, it was a pattern. And patterns don't change because one person quietly endures them. They change because leaders decide silence is no longer an option. And that's the kind of leader I hope to be. It's the kind of leader I hope we're developing together. So if today's conversation challenged you at all, and maybe you're just wondering where you're at on that leadership spectrum, I invite you to take my free What's Holding You Back Executive Readiness Snapshot. Just a few minutes, you're going to discover the leadership behaviors that may be keeping you from becoming the obvious choice for that next level, and receive some practical insights to help you continue growing as a leader. You can find it at graceandsaltleadership.com. Remember, your breakthrough begins the moment you stop being the go-to doer and become the go-to leader. As I end today on this topic, that this conversation that I want to start to have publicly, if you've got any challenges, if you've got any questions, if you're a man who isn't quite sure what a woman experiences and you're not quite sure how to have that conversation with women in your organization, I want to talk to you. Please reach out to me. And if you're a woman who's going through something like I went through, I want you to reach out to me and I'll walk you through it. I'll help you through it. I'll be your friend. And my goal is that you, everybody listening to this, you're going to change the culture in your organization one conversation at a time, one reaction at a time, and do something. Don't let the silence go by. Don't let other people think that it's okay to say this or to act that way. It's not okay. Regardless of what happened in the past, let's start today. Let's change our cultures for the better, for the next generation, for granddaughters like mine, Valerie. Let's change it so that she doesn't have to experience this ever. Wouldn't that be amazing? All right, everyone, I just want you to keep leading forward and let's continue this conversation.
Thanks so much for hanging out on the top floor. If today's episode gave you something to think about or a little boost, share it with your friends to keep the momentum going. And hey, if you're ready to rise, find your voice, and lead with clarity and confidence, we'd love to connect with you. Reach out at graceandsaltleadership.com to learn how Grace and Salt can support your growth. Remember, you don't have to lead like everyone else. Just lead like you. All right, I'll see you next time on the top floor.